Hi guys, welcome to my channel. So Ashley. Today's sewing project is relatively beginner friendly and my favorite part is it's cheap. All you need is a blanket, which you might already have, some elastic, and some old flip-flops, and then maybe some scrap fabric. That's pretty much it, so let's get started.
Shall we begin?
So first things first, I made a pattern and I just traced around these shorts. And you want to be sure to stretch the elastic band at the top to mark it. And then I just go back in with the ruler to straighten out the lines. And to make the back piece, I cut extra paper and folded it along the side seam line. And I just went around and traced it, and then I added about an inch extra to the crotch area. And then I added 1/2 inch seam allowance everywhere except for the waist where I added 1 inch. And then I almost cut the back and front pieces apart, but then I realized I don't have to sew as much if I just keep the side seams together like that. Then for the pajama top, I started with this tank top. So I folded it in half and traced around the front. And I lowered the neckline a bit to fit my head through it. And I also made the armholes come out a little bit wider. And then same thing to make the back piece, I just folded on the center front and then traced around. And I raised the neckline in the back a little bit, and I also made it a little bit wider at the armhole.
This is not a drill.
And for the seam allowance, I added 1 inch to the bottom and 1/2 inch everywhere else. And this one I did cut apart, but you don't have to add seam allowance to the front because you're going to be cutting it out on the fold. And here's all 3 pattern pieces that you'll need for the pajamas. I ended up adding a little bit of width to the front since it wouldn't be stretchy. Here is the blanket that I'll be using for this project. I believe it was 50 by 60 inches, and you'll see I ended up using literally all of it. And to save as much fabric as possible, I always try to fold it still on grain, but just enough so that the pattern piece fits. So here are all the pieces cut out. It's just 2 for the shorts and 2 for the top. And I do have to warn you, this project is pretty messy. Real snowy, very festive. And starting with the shorts, I sewed it right sides together, which was kind of hard to find with this fabric, but I figured it out. In most blankets like this fabric doesn't really fray, so I just did a straight stitch and I didn't do anything to finish the edge. After that, you want to open it up and sew the crotch seam, pinning it right sides together so the seams that you just sewed are meeting. And same thing here, 1/2 inch with a straight stitch. Next, I added elastic to the waist. So I cut a piece that was the right size for my waist and sewed it into a loop. And then you want to mark your center, front and back, and your 2 sides. And mark the same thing on the shorts so that the elastic gets stretched evenly. And this time I'm pinning it on to the wrong side of the fabric. So the wrong side is the correct side. This time we're going to sew with a zigzag stitch. And you want to sew at the very edge of the fabric and the elastic so that the zig is in the fabric and the zag is off the edge of the fabric, if that makes sense to you. So then you're going to fold the elastic inwards so that you don't really see it anymore. And still using a zigzag stitch, you're going to sew on the right side of the fabric this time at about 1 inch so that you're still catching the elastic even though you can't see it. And the last thing to do for the shorts is do the hem, which honestly is not entirely necessary if you don't want to do it, but I think it looks cleaner. So I folded it over about 1 inch. I don't know, I was eyeballing it. And I switched back to a straight stitch and sewed at about 3/4 of an inch. And I sewed on the wrong side just so I could see how much I was folding it because I didn't pin it this time, I just folded it as I was going. And just as I was literally almost finished with the shorts, I ran out of bobbin thread, of course. Moving on to the top, I just pinned together the front and back pieces right sides together along the side seam and the shoulder seams. And I sewed all of those with a straight stitch at 1/2 inch. And of course, don't forget to back stitch. So with that sewn together, before continuing, I tried it on and it didn't fit, of course. So I seam ripped the side seams. And I just cut out a couple of scrap pieces to add to my side seams, trying to match up the length. So remember, if something doesn't fit you, you can most likely just add a wedge to it. I've done this like an embarrassing amount of times, especially when I was first learning how to make a pattern. Nothing ever fits the first time. So I sewed one of the panels onto my side seam, and of course I did it the wrong way the first time, so I had to seam rip again.
Well, I wish I were dead.
It was just one of those days. So I got it on the right way this time, and this is how it looked. And then I decided to lower the neckline a little bit more. And then it was time to add elastic to the hem of the shirt. And I did the same thing as the shorts, matching up the center front and back and side seams. And sides. They're not going to match the seams, just the sides. And same thing with the zigzag stitch, sewing along that edge. And then folding it over and sewing from the right side. Then to finish the rest of the raw edges, I folded it over 1/2 inch, and you definitely want to pin a lot because it's hard to fold a curve like that. Then I sewed with a straight stitch pretty close to the edge. I wouldn't recommend it. I would go 1/4 inch, but I did 1/8 of an inch. So you want to do that around the neckline and both of the armholes. And here's how it looked. It was a little bit messy and it wanted to roll outward. So I went back in and sewed with the zigzag stitch right inside that line, right next to it. And that definitely helped keep it nice and flat. And at this point it's done, but I decided to add a little bow at the center of the neckline. And then I decided to add one to the shorts too. And listen to me when I say it's a bad idea to wear black leggings when you're working with fuzzy fabric. The next thing I made with this blanket was slippers. So I used these $5 flip-flops from Target because I didn't have any old flip-flops. And I actually followed a tutorial from Pinterest because I've never done this before. So first I just took off the rubbery strap thingies. I don't know what to call this. After that, I just traced around the flip-flop. And I added a 1/2 inch of seam allowance all the way around. And then I traced the toe part. And then I added about 1 inch on either side where the opening is going to be. And a good rule that I didn't know is it should be long enough to go to the middle of the arch, but I ended up having to add length later. But I make mistakes, so you don't have to. Then to cover the sides, you want to measure all the way around the shoe and cut a 2-inch strip that length, plus seam allowance at the end. So for the top bit of the slipper, I laid out the pattern piece intentionally so it would look cute, and I cut out these little trees. And for the bottom of the slipper, I used this faux leather fabric, which is not entirely necessary. You could probably just glue the side pieces to the flip-flop itself and leave the flip-flop on the bottom. For each slipper, I cut out 2 of the toe pieces, 2 of the insole pieces, 1 of the bottom pieces, and 1 of the side pieces. And at this point, I felt like I was becoming a snowman. I was probably inhaling so much fuzz. For the top piece, I added a little bit of elastic to the opening for support. So I pinned the pieces right sides together with a little piece of elastic. And then I sewed with a zigzag stitch just along that straight edge. And then you want to flip it right side out and sew along the curved edge at a 1/4 inch with a straight stitch. Here's my 2 toe pieces, and here's all the fuzz on my table. Then I went ahead and sewed my 2 insole pieces together, also at a 1/4 inch. Just flat together, you're not going to flip it or anything. Then I sewed the short end of my long strip together at a 1/2 inch. Then you pin the strip to the bottom piece, or if you don't want to use the bottom piece, you can skip this step. Oh, what the? Are you serious? I swear this project was cursed for me because that has never happened to my machine before. So after screwing that back together, I sewed around that at 1/2 inch. And then I went back in and trimmed off the seam allowance. Then I pinned my top piece to my insole piece, just flat wrong side to right side. Then I pinned the other side of the strip, right sides together, to the rest of the slipper. And I sewed all the way around that at 1/2 inch, leaving a bit of a hole to flip it right side out and also to insert the flip-flop. This was definitely the hardest part. I didn't know how the heck I was gonna get that flip-flop in there. It was so stiff. So I ended up opening it up a little bit more and then just forcing it in there. Like, I folded it in half as much as I could and just got it in. Anyway, that's why I recommend just don't put the bottom part on. Just glue the sides to the flip-flop. The last thing here was to close up that hole. So I tried sewing it by hand first, and then I ended up gluing the top half to the side and then finishing it with the hand stitching. And then, like I said, I went back in and added a band to add length to that top part. And that was entirely hand sewed on, so yeah. Don't make that mistake. So that was meant to be the end of the project, but I had all these awkward pieces left of the blanket and I wanted to do something with it, so I ended up cutting out the biggest square that I could to make a throw pillow. After I cut that piece out, I just cut out a bunch of patchwork pieces for the other side. Here's how all the pieces looked before, and then after they were sewn together. Then I sewed them right sides together, leaving a little gap. Flip that right side out. And then I took the rest of my scraps and cut it into a bunch of tiny little pieces to use as filler for the pillow. And I wish I would have thought of this sooner because I would have kept all of my scraps and put them in there, and it probably would have filled the entire thing. And honestly, if you don't want to make the slippers and you do want to make the pajamas, you could probably just use the rest of that blanket and make an even bigger throw pillow. So after I put all that in there, I went back in and finished filling it with polyfill. Then the last thing to do was hand sew that hole shut. And this time I show you exactly how I did it. And here's how everything turned out. I hope you liked that video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to subscribe to see more videos like this. And if you try this project, let me know how it goes. Thanks for watching.